We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Back to your article here. A section that really stood out to me was a quote that you from Thomas Jefferson in 1824. I've got it written down. He says, "Men by their constitutions are naturally divided into two parties." Okay, so he was kind of giving you a warning there, I think. And as you rightly say, Democrats claimed him as essentially the first president, as it were. But I feel that what he says very much represents what we might call a modern leftist perspective, as in people operate as a collective group, which is essentially the polar opposite of the idea that we're each individuals, and more so that the smallest minority that needs consideration from a government is the individual, which is a position very much on the political right. So that there appears to be that divide already there. And although it's perhaps not best exemplified by today's Republican or conservative parties, the individualism stuff, but is this Jeffersonian perspective, is it perhaps the original political sin from which all others have grown? Does that make any sense at all?
Yes, it does. But, here's my solution. I think we ought to get rid of the Republican and Democrat parties and replace them with the status quo and solution parties. Now, imagine that. Yeah, I think that would be brilliant. I just thought of it. I'm going to write about it.
It's good. Yeah.
but you're not getting anything solved. I'm watching, as we move into these first debates among Republicans and whether Trump will show up and all of his problems, legal problems, for 91 different felony counts now, which is ridiculous. And nobody's actually talking about solutions that really work. Oh, yes, some will mention we need to secure the border and we need to do this and that. But we've heard all of this before. Even Trump didn't fully secure the border. We've got all of this, these steel bars lying in deserts in New Mexico and Arizona, because the day that Biden came into office, he stopped building the wall. And that's why we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of illegal migrants coming into this country, and the Democrat Party will do nothing about it. Kathy Hochul, the New York governor, sent a blistering multi-page letter to the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, denouncing the way he has approached this whole migrant issue. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost, Mark. These are people who declared themselves to be virtuous by calling their states and cities sanctuary states and cities. And now they're, and they won't do anything about it. They won't call on Biden to secure the border. Republicans want to secure the border, but you can't have a country if you don't control your borders. So I think the parties are now way out of sync with what the majority of Americans want, but they are catering to their extremes on both right in the Republican Party and left in the Democrat Party. And that's why you have the most extreme candidates getting nominated. And I don't think that if Trump gets nominated, whether he's in jail or not, I don't think that he's going to win the national election. That's what the Democrats are counting on, and that's why they're piling on with all of these felony counts.
What you mentioned in the article that that the way forward is for an individual to go forward. I love the idea of the status quo and the change things up party. But essentially, that isn't that what they are supposed to be? Conservatives and progressives, right? They're supposed to be conservatives, maintain the status quo while you can. But the idea of somebody else coming in, because it's true that as seems likely based on the polling so far, the two candidates will be Joe Biden, Donald Trump. Assuming
the polling also shows, Mark, that a large majority of Americans don't want either one of them.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't. The vast majority don't want either of these people. But the idea of a third party coming through, it doesn't even seem possible. I think it was 1992. Ross Perot, he got it was under 20%, but not far of the popular vote, and no electoral college votes. And before him, you've got George Wallace did quite well.
Ralph Nader.
Ralph Nader, I think it was like 6%. But then
it doesn't take much. This is a very closely divided nation. There are only 4 states that really matter, that are contestable.
Yeah.
and all the rest are going to go one way or the other. So that's the way where most of the money and most of the TV ads are placed.
So if you had, let's say, for example, somebody like a Teddy Roosevelt, who I'm going to say 1912,
Yeah, Bull Moose
and
Party. Yeah,
in the Bull Moose as a
yeah,
Bull Moose
Bull Moose
candidate,
Party. Yeah,
he did really well.
yeah.
I mean, he did really well in he got electoral votes. He got, I think he was like the biggest ever result, wasn't he?
Today
For
we ought to call it the BS Party, but that's another issue.
the Rocky and Bullwinkles. But you have so many people pushing things like this no labels group, which I'd like to get your brief take on what you think of the no labels group, because to me it just seems like something that is designed to try and stop Donald Trump. But if
Yeah.
it seems like it will hurt Biden, they'll just give it all up.
Well, the problem with the no labels group is that they have negotiated important issues, economic issues, foreign policy issues, social issues, down to a level where it doesn't really matter. Okay, we agree on these small things, but what about the big things? I
Mm.
mean, these come out of a ideological or a religious or a social perspective. You can't ask people to change their minds on these things. For example, I'm not going to say, yeah, I'm not for reducing the cost of government anymore. That would not be me. That's just not me. Or I'm for abortion on demand. No, I could never do that. So what are the compromises in no labels? And, they're looking for a candidate. Maybe they're talking Joe Manchin, who got duped into this Inflation Reduction Act that even Biden now wishes he had called something else, which ought to tell you something about the flim flam of Washington.
Mm.
But I follow the advice of William F. Buckley Jr., one of the great minds of conservatism, who said he'd rather win the argument. That's the important thing. Let's win the argument. Just throwing these rehearsed sound bites back and forth like mortar fire from our bunkers doesn't solve anything. Let's win the argument. Let's say, okay, you, sir, are a liberal and you believe in the following things. Have they worked? Have they produced the results that you claim they would? If they did, and if they can't be done cheaper by the private sector, we keep them. And that ought to be the same standard for people like me on the conservative side. If we have history like we did under John F. Kennedy, who cut taxes, who reduced the size of government, Calvin Coolidge, our 30th president, who took office 100 years ago today after the death of Warren Harding. He cut the size of government by 1/3. He left with a budget surplus. Even Bill Clinton balanced the budget twice, once with the help of Newt Gingrich, the House Speaker, and welfare reform. The two of them worked out a deal on welfare reform. It's all coming back now because the more you addict people to government, the more they're going to vote for your party. You see, That's the danger in it.
Yeah, it seems that I can't remember who said. I think it was an economist. There's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary government program, and you're just instilling that into the system, into the culture, the people. It really acts as a safeguard, doesn't it?
Well,
Don't get rid of us, or you'll lose these things that we've given you.
Right. The great line, of course, was from Reagan, as usual. The only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. It's easier to kill a vampire. And the analogy is a good one because both suck the lifeblood out of their hosts. You just can't go on spending this way. There is no nation, as I wrote in a previous book, that has been able to sustain itself with massive national debt, with open borders, and with a loss of a shared moral value system. And now, if there is no right or wrong, whether it is in spending or in personal relationships, if anything goes, then nothing goes. And this is the history, as I wrote in a book called America's Expiration Date, The Fall of Empires, Superpowers, and the Future of the United States. What makes us think that we can escape the judgment of history if we go down the path of those nations and superpowers that followed this way of spending and open borders and the loss of a shared moral value system? What makes us unique? Nothing.
And on that note, Cal, thank you ever so much. Cal Thomas, thanks for being here today.
A pleasure, Mark. Always. Thanks.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Tim Donner and Cal Thomas, and of course extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in and join us. I'll leave you with the wise words of John Adams, who said, quote, "There's nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader, and concerting measures in opposition to each other. This, in my humble apprehension, is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution." End quote. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.